He demanded to know her kill count, a number she did not keep. He measured worth in spent cartridges and confirmed targets, in the visceral, bloody math of close-quarters combat. He did not know that her targets were mountains, that her weapons were tectonic plates, and that her true count was not measured in bodies, but in entire theaters of war rendered silent. He would learn. The mountain would teach him. The silence of Forward Operating Base Athelberg was a composite thing. It was woven from the hiss of recycled air, the low, thrumming resonance of the geothermal converters buried 3 kilometers beneath the floor plates, and the profound geological quiet of the Andromache Range that entombed the facility. It was a silence that had weight, a pressure that felt like the 8,000 meters of metasedimentary and igneous rock pressing down from above. Dr. Aris Thorne felt it not as a threat, but as a constant, a truth. The rock was a slow, patient creature, and she had learned its language. Her fingers, stained with the fine gray dust of a fresh core sample, hovered over the holographic interface of her workstation. The light cast a blue, sterile glow on her face, carving her features into sharp, ascetic planes. She wore no uniform, only a set of charcoal gray utility fatigues that bore no rank, no insignia, no name. To the 120 Marines of Ethelberg's garrison, she was simply the geologist, a civilian anomaly in their rigid, structured world. Her world was a triptych of data streams. On the left, a real-time seismic feed from the network of micro-tremor sensors she had personally calibrated and installed throughout the sector. They were her nerve endings, pressed against the deep, cold skin of the planet. The central display showed a dynamic, 3-dimensional model of the FOB and the surrounding mountain massif, a ghostly lattice of wireframes and stress vectors. To the right, a cascade of raw numerical data scrolled past, a torrent of numbers that she read not as digits, but as a flowing script. It was the mountain's heartbeat, its quiet exhalations, its slow, inexorable dreams of gravity and time. She was listening for a whisper, a deviation in the planetary rhythm that would betray the enemy's next move. The insurgents they faced, the so-called children of the fold, were not conventional fighters. They did not use explosives or kinetic weapons in the traditional sense. They used the planet itself as their primary weapon, initiating landslides, triggering resonant quakes, and manipulating the isostatic balance of the entire range. They were geological ghosts, and she was the only one who could hunt them. A tremor, barely perceptible to the base's inertial dampeners, shivered through the deck plating. The Marines in the command center, the pit, barely registered it. To them, it was just the mountain settling, a common occurrence in this volatile region. To Aris, it was a sentence. Her eyes flicked to the left-hand display. A specific sensor, designated TR7, located deep within a syncline fold 20 clicks to the north, had just reported a spike in low-frequency oscillation. It was a clean, almost melodic waveform, too pure to be natural. It was manufactured. She isolated the signal, her fingers tracing commands in the air. The system cross-referenced the frequency against her library of known signatures. A match bloomed on the screen, flagged in ominous crimson. Cascade resonator signature, Type 4. Her jaw tightened. A Type 4 was a deep earth device, designed not for a simple rock slide, but to exploit a pre-existing tectonic fault line. It was an instrument of catastrophic failure. The airlock to the pit hissed open, breaking the sterile quiet with a percussive blast of sound and pressure. Captain Ivan Rostova entered, his presence sucking the air from the room, He was a large man, built like the armored bulkheads of the facility, his face a mask of chiseled confidence and barely contained aggression. His combat armor was scoured and marked, each scratch a point of pride. He moved with the predatory grace of a man who believed his physical dominance was a universal solvent for any problem. His gaze swept the pit, dismissing the technicians hunched over their consoles, and landed on Eris. His lip curled in a familiar expression of disdain. He saw her not as a scientist or a strategic asset, but as a soft, civilian indulgence the high command had saddled him with. "Still playing with your rocks, Doctor?" His voice was a blunt instrument designed to hammer and assert. It echoed slightly in the cavernous space, a violation of its carefully maintained acoustics. Eris did not look up. Her focus remained locked on the spreading crimson stain on her map. The resonance from TR7 was propagating, exciting sympathetic vibrations in the surrounding rock strata. The mountain was beginning to hum, a low, deadly tune that only she could hear. "The northern syncline is active," she stated, her voice flat, devoid of inflection. It was a simple delivery of data. Rostova strode over to her station, planting his heavy gauntlets on the edge of her console. He leaned in, his shadow falling over her displays. He smelled of sweat, ozone from the firing range, and a cloying artificial nutrient paste. He glanced at the complex waveforms and geological strata maps with a look of profound incomprehension, which he quickly masked with a sneer. "Active? The whole damn planet is active, Thorne. It's a rock. Rocks settle." He tapped a finger against the display showing the TR7 spike. "What's this little scribble supposed to mean to me? Is it going to cost me another requisition for sensor probes you keep losing?" "That is a Type 4 cascade resonator signature," she replied, her eyes still tracking the data. The resonance was now being picked up by two more sensors, TR8 and TR11. It was forming a tripod, a classic deployment pattern for inducing a targeted lithospheric collapse. "The enemy has placed a device inside the Kepler fault. They are attempting to trigger a fault slip event." Rostova laughed, a short, barking sound that made the nearest technician flinch. "A fault slip event? You mean an earthquake? Lady, we're in a military-grade bunker buried under 5 miles of granite. We're the safest people on this entire miserable moon. Let them have their little tremor. It'll probably save us the trouble of blasting that ridge for a new comms tower." He straightened up, puffing out his chest. His gaze drifted to the kill tally stenciled on the side of his helmet, which sat on a nearby console. A series of stark white lines, each representing a confirmed enemy neutralization. He then looked back at her, a cruel smirk playing on his lips. "You know, I was talking with my lieutenant. We were wondering, what's your kill count, Doctor? How many enemy combatants have you personally put down?" The question hung in the air, thick and deliberate. It was a public challenge, a dominance play. He was framing her as a non-contributor, a passive observer in their war. The other Marines in the pit, who had been pretending not to listen, now fell silent. Their attention was a palpable weight. Eris finally lifted her head, her gaze meeting his. Her eyes were the color of the deep, cold ice found in the planet's polar crevasses. They were calm, analytical, and held no trace of fear or anger. She processed his question as she would any other data point, a variable introduced into an equation designed to produce a specific reaction. She chose not to provide the expected one. "That number is not a relevant metric for my work," she said. Her voice was quiet, yet it cut through the lingering echo of his laughter. Rostova's smirk widened. He had her. He saw her response as an evasion, an admission of irrelevance. Not relevant? We're in a war zone, Doctor. The only metric that matters is the one that keeps us alive and puts the enemy in the ground. I've got 27 confirms on this rotation alone. My men, over 100 combined. That's relevance. That's a metric. You look at rocks. We take lives to save our own. He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial growl. It's okay. You're not built for it. Some people just aren't. Stick to your charts. Leave the fighting to the professionals. He had made his point. He had publicly established the hierarchy. Him, the warrior. Her, the sheltered academic. He turned away, satisfied, ready to move on to what he considered actual work. The Kepler fault has a calculated shear stress potential of 7.4 zetajoules, Eris said to his back. He stopped. He did not turn, but his shoulders tensed. The number, meaningless as it was to him, had a gravitas he could not ignore. The device they have planted is not designed to create a simple tremor, she continued, her voice maintaining its clinical calm. It is designed to release that stored energy in a single, catastrophic burst. It will not be an earthquake. It will be a delamination event. The entire lithodermal plate on which this base is constructed will shear off from the underlying mantle stratum. We are not in a bunker under a mountain, Captain. We are in a tomb, and the enemy is turning the key. A new alert chimed, sharp and insistent. It was not from her seismic array, but from the base's own structural integrity sensors. A hairline fracture had appeared on the main pressure diagram, deep in the foundation pylons. It was colored a warning yellow. Rostova finally turned, his face a thunderous mask of fury, and for the first time, a flicker of uncertainty. He looked from the main screen to her, then back again. His world view, built on the simple physics of bullets and armor, was being assaulted by a lexicon he did not understand. But the crack on the screen was a language he knew all too well. It was the language of failure. "What did you do?" he snarled, his immediate instinct to assign blame. "I have done nothing," Eris replied, her fingers already flying across her console, rerouting auxiliary power to her deep scan processors. "I am observing a process you have chosen to ignore." The deck plating shuddered again, more violently this time. A fine dust rained down from the ceiling conduits. The lights flickered. The single yellow line on the structural display turned a bright, angry red and was joined by another. The mountain had begun its sermon, and the entire base was now the congregation. Rostova's confidence, as solid as he thought it was, began to show its own hairline fractures. He had mocked her for her lack of kills, for her sterile, academic pursuits. He was about to learn that there were forces in the universe far deadlier than a man with a rifle, and that the quiet woman in front of him understood them better than anyone alive. The challenge had been issued and answered. Now, the crisis would deliver the verdict. The second tremor was a physical blow. It was not a vibration. It was a lurch, a sickening drop that felt as if the entire facility had fallen several meters. Emergency lights bathed the pit in a pulsating crimson glare, and the klaxon for a full structural alert began to blare, a synthetic, repetitive scream. On the main schematic, the two red lines of the initial fractures were now joined by a spider web of others, spreading from the foundations like cracks in ice. A status report flashed on a secondary screen. Containment breach warning, Sector Gamma 7, hull integrity at 82%. The mountain was no longer settling. It was breaking. Captain Rostova reacted as he was trained to react, with immediate, overwhelming force. "All hands to battle stations," he roared, his voice cutting through the din of the alarms. "Damage control teams to Gamma 7, now. Seal those breaches. Security teams, full combat alert. I want exterior contact points 1 through 12 manned and ready. They're coming. This is the prelude to a ground assault." His mind, honed by years of conventional warfare, could only interpret the event in one way. The seismic disturbance was cover. The real attack was yet to come. It was a textbook maneuver, and he would counter it with a textbook defense. He turned to the comms officer. "Get me a line to Fleet Command. I want a full orbital kinetic strike package on standby. Target coordinates to follow." He then pointed a trembling, gauntleted finger at Eris's station. "And shut that damn thing off. I need clear comms, not your ghost hunting noise." "Sir, orbital strikes will be ineffective," Eris stated, her voice a sliver of ice in the heated chaos. She had not moved. Her focus was absolute, a singularity of concentration amidst the panic. "The target is not on the surface. It is 3 kilometers below it. A kinetic strike will only add to the kinetic energy already in the system. You would be helping them." "I gave you an order, Doctor," Rostova bellowed, his face purpling with rage. He strode towards her console, his hand raised as if to physically disable it. The observant subordinate, a young comms technician named Corporal Jian Li, instinctively took a half-step forward, placing himself partially between the captain and Eris. Li had spent weeks watching her work, noting the quiet intensity, the way her data stream seemed to predict minor base tremors minutes before they happened. He didn't understand what she did, but he recognized the signal of true competence. "Sir," Li said, his voice tight but steady, "her network is our only source of real-time subsurface data. Shutting it down would blind us." Rostova froze, his fury momentarily checked by the unexpected pushback from a junior NCO. He glared at Li, then back at Aris. "Blind us to what? Fairy tales? Ghost signatures?" He gestured wildly at the main screen, where his Marines were represented as green icons moving to their designated defensive positions. "That is reality. Men with guns on a wall. That is what will save this base, not your seismic poetry." Another lurch, more violent than the last. This time, the sound of tearing metal screamed from deep within the base's structure. A cascade of sparks erupted from a ceiling conduit, and a section of the pit's overhead lighting went dark. The main schematic flashed a new, terrifying update. Pylon 4 integrity, critical failure imminent. Pylon 4 was one of the 4 primary load-bearing pillars that anchored the entire FOB to the bedrock. "Captain, we're getting reports from the exterior teams," the comms officer shouted over the noise. "There's no enemy contact, 0. The landscape is dead quiet." "They're underground," Rostova insisted, his dogma warring with the evidence. "They're tunneling. Standard insurgent tactic. Get me ground-penetrating radar online." "Sir, with all due respect," Li interjected again, his voice gaining a fraction more confidence. "Dr. Thorne's array is essentially the most sensitive ground-penetrating system in the sector. If there were tunnelers, she would see them." He looked at Eris, a silent question in his eyes. Eris answered it for him, and for the room. She swiped a hand across her console, projecting her central display onto the main holotank in the center of the pit. The simple green icons of Rostova's tactical map were replaced by her terrifyingly complex geological model. The Kepler fault was now a blazing artery of crimson light. The resonance from the enemy device was no longer a simple hum. It was a feedback loop, a self-amplifying wave of pure energy tearing through the rock. "They are not tunneling, Captain," she said, her voice commanding the room's attention. "They are tuning. The frequency of the resonator is approaching the natural resonant frequency of the granite batholith that forms this massif. It's a principle of physics. When they match, the result is amplitude amplification on an exponential scale. The molecular bonds of the rock itself will fail." She pointed to a pulsing node on the map, the source of the entire event. "That is their weapon. It is located here." Then she pointed to the glowing wire frame of FOB Ethelberg. "And this is the tuning fork." Rostova stared at the image, his mind struggling to grasp the scale of what she was describing. He understood bombs. He understood bullets. He did not understand a war being fought with harmonic frequencies. His methods, his entire military doctrine, were useless. Brute force was not only ineffective, it was counterproductive. Calling for an airstrike was like trying to put out a fire with gasoline. Fortifying the walls was like reinforcing a sandcastle against a tsunami. The systemic failure of his worldview was happening in real time, displayed in blinking red lights and the groans of dying metal. Then what do we do?" a voice asked. It was the weapons officer, his face pale. The question was directed not at Rostova, but at Aris. The shift in the room was subtle, but undeniable. Authority was beginning to decouple from rank. It was flowing towards the source of the only coherent information. Rostova heard it. He saw the eyes of his command staff turning from him to the quiet civilian. His power, built on the certainty of his rank and the volume of his voice, was evaporating. "We stick to the plan," he said, his voice strained, desperate to reclaim control. "We defend the perimeter. That is our job." "There is no perimeter to defend," Aris said, her words landing like chips of ice. "The battlefield is not outside. It is beneath our feet, and we are losing." As if to punctuate her statement, a final bone-jarring impact threw everyone from their feet. The lights went out completely, plunging the pit into absolute darkness, broken only by the hellish red of the emergency strobes and the ghostly blue of Aris's still-functioning console. A deafening screech of tortured metal echoed from below, followed by a profound, final boom. On the main holotank, the icon for Pylon 4 blinked once, then vanished. "Catastrophic structural failure," the text warned. "Cascade collapse imminent." The crisis had arrived. Orthodoxy had failed. In the flickering red twilight of the ruined command center, surrounded by the wreckage of his certainty, Captain Rostova was silent. He had no more orders to give. In the ensuing silence, broken only by the rhythmic shriek of the alarm and the distant groaning of the mountain, a new kind of order began to coalesce. It was not born of rank or protocol, but of necessity. The paralysis that had gripped the command staff was absolute. Rostova stood frozen, his face illuminated in strobing flashes of red, a monument to the failure of convention. His playbook was empty. The enemy was not at the gates. The gates themselves, along with the entire foundation of his reality, were being unmade. Every eye in the pit, consciously or not, drifted towards the one island of calm in the sea of chaos. Aris Thorn. She had not been thrown from her feet. At the moment of the final impact, she had simply braced herself against her console, her body moving with an economy of motion that suggested she had anticipated the precise vector and magnitude of the shock. Her display was a universe of frantic, scrolling data, but her expression was one of intense, unadulterated focus. She was not panicking. She was processing. The mountain was speaking in a torrent of catastrophic violence, and she was the only one fluent in its language. The main resonator has achieved 92% frequency lock, she announced, her voice cutting through the lingering shock. It was not a statement of fear, but of fact, a clinical diagnosis. At 100%, the batholith will undergo liquefaction. Structural collapse will not be sequential. It will be instantaneous. She made a minute adjustment on her control surface. Estimated time to total collapse, 11 minutes. 11 minutes. The number hung in the air, more terrifying than any war cry. It was a death sentence, delivered with the cold precision of a physicist. Corporal Lee, picking himself up from the floor, moved to her side. His face was streaked with dust, but his eyes were clear. "Doctor, what do we need?" He did not ask for an opinion. He did not ask if anything could be done. He asked what she required. It was the most profound transfer of power the pit had ever witnessed. Authority did not need to be seized. It was flowing to her as water flows to the lowest point. She was now the center of gravity. Eris's eyes flicked from her screen to Lee's face for a fraction of a second. She registered his readiness, his acceptance of the new reality. "I need access to the primary geothermal converter controls," she said. "And I need to reroute the entire base power grid to the core tap drill assembly." The request was so far outside the realm of standard procedure that it bordered on insanity. The geothermal converter was the base's heart, its life support. The core tap drill was a piece of scientific equipment, a massive deep earth boring tool used to take geological samples from the planet's mantle. It was currently dormant, its systems cold. To reroute the entire base's power to it would mean shutting down everything else. What remained of the lights, the life support in non-essential sectors, the weapon systems, the comms, it was a gamble of unbelievable proportions. The base's chief engineer, a lieutenant whose face was slick with sweat, looked at Rostova, a desperate final plea for orders. He was met with a blank stare. The captain was adrift. The engineer then looked at Eris. "Doctor, that would take our defensive systems offline. The main energy cannons, the perimeter grid, everything. And the drill hasn't been fully powered in over a year. It would take a miracle to get it operational in 11 minutes. "We do not need defensive systems," Eris stated, her logic irrefutable. "There is nothing to shoot at. The miracle is not optional. It is required." She turned to Lee. "Can you get me control?" Lee was already at a secondary console, his fingers a blur across the keys. "The captain's command-level protocols are still active. I can't override the core systems without his authorization code." He looked over at Rostova, who seemed not to have heard. The moment stretched, taut and thin. The bass groaned again, a long, mournful sound of defeat. Then another voice. "Give her the codes." It was the weapons officer, the same one who had first turned to her. He was now standing, his sidearm still holstered, his posture one of defiance aimed squarely at the captain's inaction. "Sir," he said, his voice hard, "give her the codes. It's our only shot." One by one, other members of the command staff murmured their assent. "Do it, sir. Listen to her. Let her try." It was a quiet mutiny, born not of malice, but of the primal instinct to survive. The crew, seeing the utter failure of their leader, was shifting its allegiance to the only person with a plan. Rostova's head snapped up. He saw the faces of his subordinates, their expressions a mixture of fear and a new, desperate hope. a hope that was directed at someone else. The humiliation was a physical blow. In that moment, he had a choice: cling to the hollow shell of his authority and doom them all, or relinquish it and perhaps live. His training, his pride, his entire identity screamed at him to reassert control. But the trembling of the deck beneath his feet was a more powerful argument. He swallowed, the sound loud in the tense quiet. His voice, when it came, was a choked whisper, the sound of a king abdicating his throne. Rostova, Alpha, 7902. Lee's fingers flew. A series of confirmation chimes sounded from his console. "I'm in," he said, a tremor of excitement in his voice. "Main engineering control is unlocked. Dr. Thorne, the system is yours." Eris gave a single, sharp nod. She did not offer thanks or acknowledgement. There was no time. Her hands moved over her own console, which now interfaced with the base's deepest, most powerful systems. The main schematic in the holotank shifted again. The geological data was now overlaid with a new layer: the engineering schematics of the core tap drill. "I am disengaging the primary power safeties," she announced to the room. "Expect massive fluctuations and system shutdowns. Do not attempt to counteract them." She issued the first command. The effect was immediate. The remaining emergency lights died. The scream of the klaxon cut out, plunging the pit into an even deeper darkness and a stunning silence. The only light was from the holotank and the consoles, now powered by their own short-term energy cells. The low hum of the life support system faded, replaced by an unnerving quiet. They were running on borrowed time in every sense. Then a new sound began. It was a low, deep thrum, felt more than heard. It was the sound of colossal capacitors charging, of cryogenic pumps spinning up to speed. It was the sound of the giants sleeping beneath their feet, beginning to stir. "Power conduits are live," the engineer reported, his voice filled with awe as he watched his own readouts. "Energy flow is at 500% of maximum rated capacity. The conduits are glowing." "They will hold," Eris stated, not as a hope, but as a calculation she had already made. "Time to collapse, 7 minutes." She had taken command. Not by force, not by rank, but by the sheer, undeniable gravity of her competence. The turn was complete. The fate of Fob Ethelberg no longer rested in the hands of a soldier. It rested in the hands of a scientist about to turn her laboratory into a weapon. The plan was an act of breathtaking violence, disguised as physics. Eris's mind perceived it not as a desperate gamble, but as an elegant, symmetrical solution. The enemy was using resonance to destroy them. She would use resonance to save them. It was a duelist's riposte, executed on a geological scale. The core tap drill was not designed as a weapon. Its purpose was to bore through planetary crust with a combination of a superheated plasma torch and a focused sonic resonator, a tool for delicate deep earth surgery. Eris was about to repurpose it into a planetary-scale tuning fork. "The enemy resonator is broadcasting at 12.38 hertz, she announced, her voice a calm anchor in the stripped-down, silent pit. The only sounds were the rising whine of the drill's power systems and the frantic clicking of Corporal Lee's keyboard as he rerouted auxiliary functions to support her. "It's a subsonic frequency, perfectly matched to the crystalline structure of the granite batholith. We cannot counter it by damping it. We must counter it by shattering it." The engineer stared at her, his mind reeling. "Shattering it? Doctor, you mean the frequency?" "I mean the rock," she corrected, her tone clinical. "The enemy's device is creating a standing wave within the fault line. It is a structure of immense energy, but it is fundamentally fragile. Like a crystal goblet, it can be shattered by a single, pure tone of a much higher, incompatible frequency. The problem is delivering that tone with enough energy to overwhelm the primary wave. Her fingers danced across the holographic interface, bringing up a simulation on the main holotank. A complex interwoven pattern of red lines represented the enemy's resonance field. Then, a single, brilliant blue line shot from the location of the FOB, striking the heart of the red web. At the point of impact, the red lines didn't just disappear. They violently decohered, shattering into a million chaotic, powerless fragments. The simulation was clean, perfect. The core tap drill's sonic emitter is capable of generating a focused pulse of up to 7,000 hertz, but only for a duration of 0.8 seconds before its focusing crystals overheat, she explained. To deliver that pulse to the Kepler fault, we must use the drill shaft itself as a waveguide. The plasma torch will vaporize a channel through the intervening rock, and the sonic pulse will follow an instant later. It was a shot in the dark, in the most literal sense imaginable. A single, needle-thin beam of energy fired through 5 kilometers of solid, unstable rock, aimed at a target the size of a shipping container, with the entire mountain on the verge of collapsing around them. The targeting, the weapons officer breathed, his professional mind grasping the impossibility of the ballistics. The calculations, even with our best targeting computers. Your computers are designed for calculating trajectories through atmosphere or vacuum, Eris cut in. They account for gravity, wind, and Coriolis effect. They do not account for variations in rock density, seismic refraction, or thermoacoustic lensing. I do. She did not say it with pride. It was a simple statement of her function. Her mind was the targeting computer. The years she had spent studying this specific mountain range, memorizing its every layer, its every flaw, its every secret stress point, had prepared her for this single moment. Core temperature at 5,000 Kelvin, Lee called out, reading from his own monitor. Capacitors are at 98% charge. The system is green. We're ready when you are, Doctor. Time to collapse, 2 minutes, Eris stated. Her eyes were fixed on the stream of data from her seismic sensors. The enemy's resonance wave was reaching its final, terrifying crescendo. The entire base was now vibrating with a low, gut-wrenching hum. I am initiating the final firing sequence. The energy discharge will be significant. Brace yourselves. She placed her index finger on a single, glowing rune on her console. The rune that initiated the plasma bore. All the power of the base, all their hope, was focused on that single point of contact. Rostova watched her, his face a pale, slack mask of awe and terror. He had commanded men into battle, had called down fire from the heavens, but he had never witnessed power like this. It was elemental. It was the power to command the very foundations of the world. He was a soldier. She was something else entirely. Firing in 3. The hum of the bass deepened, the vibration intensifying. 2. A single bead of sweat traced a path down the engineer's temple. 1. Eris pressed the rune. Now! There was no explosion, no roar. The first moment of the discharge was one of profound and absolute silence. The power draw was so immense that the air in the pit seemed to thin, the emergency lighting on the consoles flickering and dying for a split second. Then came the vibration. It was not the chaotic, lurching shudder of the earthquake. This was a pure, clean, impossibly deep thrum that resonated directly in the bones, in the teeth. It was the sound of a star being born beneath their feet. On the holotank, A brilliant white line erupted from the base's icon, a spear of pure light plunging down into the earth. It moved with impossible speed, vaporizing a perfect channel through the complex strata Eris had mapped in her mind. It was a flawless execution of 1,000,000,000 calculations, a perfect synthesis of geology and physics. "Plasma channel established," Eris said, her voice steady. "Firing sonic pulse." Her other hand moved, striking another rune. This time, there was a sound. It was not loud. It was a high-frequency ping, so pure and clean it was almost beautiful. It was the sound of a crystal bell being struck, a single, perfect note that lasted for less than a second. But its effect on the mountain was total. For a heart-stopping instant, the violent shaking of the base intensified, a final, convulsive spasm. Then it stopped. The silence that followed was not the composite, mechanical silence of before. This was a true and absolute quiet. The deep, malevolent hum of the enemy resonator was gone. The groaning of stressed metal was gone. The shuddering of the rock was gone. It was the silence of a fever that had broken, a silence of profound, deafening relief. On the main hollow tank, the angry red web of the enemy's resonance field shattered, just as it had in the simulation. It dissolved into a cloud of harmless, fading static. The stress warnings on the structural schematic blinked from red to yellow, then to a steady, stable green. The catastrophic failure had been averted. The cascade had been broken. The threat was neutralized. A long, collective sigh seemed to pass through the occupants of the pit. Someone began to laugh, a shaky, hysterical sound. The engineer slumped into his chair, burying his face in his hands. Corporal Lee stared at Aris, his expression one of unadulterated reverence. He had not just witnessed a technical solution, he had witnessed a miracle. Aris, her work done, simply leaned back in her chair. Her face, illuminated by the calm blue glow of her console, was impassive. She watched the seismic data return to its normal, rhythmic state. The mountain's heartbeat was steady again. She had faced the storm and imposed her will upon it. The unconventional triumph was complete. Rostova stood alone in the center of the room, a ghost at his own funeral. The base was saved. His people were alive, and he had contributed nothing but obstruction and scorn. He looked at Eris, then at the faces of his crew, who were now looking at her not as a civilian, but as their savior. In the quiet aftermath, the new hierarchy was cemented not by a declaration, but by the simple, undeniable truth of what had just occurred. The checkmate had been delivered, and he had been nothing but a pawn on the board. The quiet that settled over the pit was deep and reflective. It was the sound of survival, of a catastrophe narrowly averted. The emergency power had been restored, casting the room in a steady, low-level light that felt blessedly normal. The crew moved with a new economy, their actions subdued, their voices low. They were checking systems, assessing the minor structural damage, but the frantic edge was gone. The crisis had passed, and its resolution had left an indelible mark on every person there. At the center of this new calm sat Aris, her attention already returned to her monitors, her face a mask of detached analysis as she studied the aftershocks of her own intervention. It was Corporal Lee who broke the spell. He approached her workstation, not with the swagger of a Marine, but with the quiet deference of a student approaching a master. He held out a nutrient paste packet, the standard issue sustenance of the base. "Doctor," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "you haven't eaten in a while." It was a simple gesture, but it was laden with a profound and unspoken respect. It was not praise, it was acknowledgement, a recognition of her humanity after she had demonstrated something almost divine. Eris looked from the packet to his face. She took it with a small, quiet nod. "Thank you, Corporal." She then turned back to her screen, the interaction complete. The new order was one of quiet competence. There was no need for fanfare. The work was the only thing that mattered. This fragile peace was shattered by the sharp, insistent chime of the long-range comm system. It was a Priority 1 channel, a red line connection reserved for the highest levels of sector command. The comms officer, startled, patched it through to the main speaker. "FOB Ethelberg, this is Sector Command. Authentication code Omega-01. Is General Varick on the line?" The name sent a ripple of shock through the room. General Varick was the supreme commander of the entire galactic theater, a near mythical figure who hadn't been heard on an open channel in years. Rostova, who had been standing silently by the holotank, stiffened as if struck by a live wire. This was it. The reckoning. He would have to explain the damage, the power surge, the near-total loss of the facility. He stepped forward, his voice hoarse but regaining a sliver of its old, authoritative timbre. "This is Captain Rostova, commanding officer of FOB Ethelberg. General, we have just weathered a significant seismic event, but the situation is under control." There was a pause on the other end, filled with the faint crackle of subspace static. Then General Varick's voice came through, and it was not what anyone expected. It was not angry or concerned. It was cold, calm, and utterly devoid of emotion. "Captain Rostova, I am not interested in your situation report. I have been monitoring the entire event via deep-range telemetry. I have one question for you. Is Asset Chimera operational?" The name meant nothing to anyone in the room. Rostova frowned, confused. "Sir, I'm not familiar with that designation. We have no asset by that name at this facility." The general's sigh was a sound of profound and infinite weariness. It was the sound of a man who had little time for fools. "Captain, Project Chimera is the single most valuable strategic asset in this entire sector. It is the reason Ethelberg Base was constructed in the first place. Its function is to monitor and counteract the enemy's geological warfare capabilities. It is not a what, Captain. It is a who. Now, for the last time, report the status of the asset." Rostova's mind raced. An asset, a person, whose job was to counteract geological warfare. His eyes, wide with a dawning, horrified understanding, slowly moved across the room and settled on the one person who fit that description. He looked at Eris Thorne, who was still calmly studying her screens, seemingly oblivious to the conversation that was deciding his fate. "Sir," Rostova began, his voice failing him. "Sir, are you referring to Dr. Thorne?" "I am referring to the woman who just single-handedly saved your command from being turned into a smear of organic matter at the bottom of a 10-kilometer deep crater." Varick's voice snapped, the calm finally breaking to reveal a core of steel. "I am referring to the individual who, for the past 5 years, has been waging a secret war that has neutralized more enemy infrastructure than your entire Marine Corps. The woman whose kill count, since you seem to be a man who appreciates such metrics, is not measured in individual combatants, but in 317 confirmed high-value strategic targets. Bunkers, command centers, subterranean shipyards, all rendered inert because she predicted their geological vulnerabilities. We do not call her Dr. Thorne. We call her Chimera. And you, Captain, have apparently spent the last 6 months using her as a glorified rock collector and insulting her in front of your men. The revelation descended upon the pit like a physical weight. Every Marine, every technician stared at Eris with a new, staggering sense of awe. The quiet, unassuming geologist was a ghost, a legend. She was not a support scientist. She was the tip of the spear, a weapon so precise and so devastating that her very existence was a closely guarded secret. The mockery over her kill count now seemed like the most profound and ignorant blasphemy. Rostova's face had gone from pale to ashen. The blood had drained from it, leaving a waxy, corpse-like mask. He had not just been wrong. He had been spectacularly, historically wrong. He had been a child playing with firecrackers in the presence of a nuclear device. Your performance during this crisis has been noted, Captain, Varick's voice continued, each word a hammer blow. Your reliance on outdated doctrine, your refusal to heed expert counsel, and your complete failure to understand the nature of your operational environment have been logged. You placed the mission, and more importantly, you placed the asset at unacceptable risk. You are relieved of command, effective immediately. Your second in command will take temporary charge until your replacement arrives. You will be confined to quarters pending a full performance review. I suggest you use that time to reflect on the difference between authority and competence. The connection cut, leaving a silence more damning than any shouting match could ever be. Rostova stood there for a long moment, his world dismantled around him. He opened his mouth, then closed it. There was nothing to say. His fall from power was absolute, a clean surgical excision performed from light years away. Without a word, he unclipped the command insignia from his collar, placed it on the edge of the holotank, and turned. He walked out of the pit, his footsteps heavy, the sound of a man walking into his own exile. He did not look at Eris. He could not. The lieutenant, his face a mixture of shock and grim determination, picked up the insignia. He looked at Eris, his expression one of pure, unadulterated respect. The formal hierarchy had now been restored to align with the demonstrated hierarchy of competence. Eris, for her part, finally looked up from her screen. She glanced at the empty space where Rostova had been, her expression unreadable. She had not sought this outcome. She had not sought vindication or revenge. She had simply done her work. The rest was just noise, the inevitable consequence of a system correcting itself. She took a small bite of the nutrient paste Lee had given her, the taste chalky and artificial. Then she turned back to her data. The mountain was quiet, but it was always talking, and she was always listening. In the days that followed, a new culture settled over FOB Ethelberg. The boisterous, aggressive energy that had radiated from Captain Rostova was gone, replaced by a quiet, focused professionalism. The Marines went about their duties with a newfound seriousness, their voices lower, their movements more deliberate. They had stared into the abyss, and the experience had changed them. The memory of the silent, vibrating terror was a permanent part of the base's institutional memory. They now understood that the greatest threats were not always the ones you could see and shoot. Eris Thorne became a figure of myth. The crew gave her a wide berth, not out of fear, but out of a deep and profound reverence. They spoke of her in hushed tones, calling her Chimera among themselves. They watched her as she moved through the base, a quiet, unassuming figure in gray fatigues, on her way to collect a new core sample or calibrate a remote sensor, and they saw not a geologist, but a guardian. They left offerings at her workstation, a rare packet of real coffee, a data chip with a new piece of music, a perfectly preserved fossil found deep in a mining tunnel. They were small, silent tributes to the woman who held the life of the mountain, and their own lives, in her hands. She accepted these offerings with the same quiet grace with which she had accepted Corporal Lee's nutrient paste. A simple nod, a rare, fleeting smile that barely touched her lips before vanishing. She did not crave their admiration. She did not require their validation. Her relationship was with the rock, with the data, with the deep, slow truths of the planet. The human element was a variable she had learned to manage, but it was not her native environment. Her victory had brought her not pleasure, but a more stable working environment. The noise had been reduced. The system was now more efficient. That was enough. One evening, Lee approached her again. He did not bring an offering. He brought a question. He held a small, dark piece of rock, shot through with a crystalline blue vein. "Doctor," he began, his voice hesitant, "I found this near the Gamma-7 breach. The way the strata are folded, it's not like the surrounding gneiss. I was wondering, what is it?" Eris took the rock from him. She turned it over in her fingers, her touch both delicate and certain. Her eyes, which could read the fate of a mountain range in a waveform, now focused on the small stone. "It's a xenolith," she said, her voice soft. "A piece of the lower mantle carried up during the initial batholith formation 300 million years ago. This blue crystal is kyanite. It only forms under immense pressure and heat." She looked up at him, her analytical gaze softening for a moment. "It's a piece of the planet's heart, a survivor." Lee nodded, understanding the unspoken metaphor. He and everyone on Ethelberg were survivors too. He had not come to praise her. He had come to learn. It was the highest form of respect he could offer, and she recognized it as such. That quiet exchange, a shared moment of curiosity over a piece of stone, was the true signifier of the new order. Competence was the new currency. Knowledge was the new authority. Her work at Ethelberg was done. The enemy's geological warfare program in the sector had been shattered, its primary weapon system reverse-engineered and neutralized. The data she had gathered from the event had provided intelligence that would keep the sector safe for a generation. A new commander arrived, a quiet, methodical officer who had been fully briefed on Chimera's identity and purpose. His first act was to ask Eris what resources she required. A few weeks later, a long-range transport arrived. It was unmarked, sleek, and silent. Eris packed her few personal belongings and her most critical data drives into a single gray case. She walked through the corridors of the base for the last time. The crew did not line the halls to salute her. They simply stopped what they were doing, stood in silence, and watched her pass. It was a more powerful farewell than any formal ceremony. As she stood in the airlock, waiting for the outer door to cycle, the new commander approached her. "Your next assignment?" he asked. "The Tartarus Rift," she replied, naming a place known only to a handful of strategists, a deep space anomaly where a rogue planetoid was threatening to destabilize an entire solar system. "The geology is problematic," he nodded. "They're lucky to have you." "Luck is not a factor," she said, just before the inner door hissed shut, sealing her away. She left as she had arrived. Quietly, without ceremony, a ghost slipping back into the shadows of the galaxy. But she did not leave Ethelberg unchanged. She left behind a legend, a story that would be told for years to come. A story about the quiet geologist who spoke to mountains, who waged a war with physics, and who taught a garrison of hardened Marines that the most dangerous weapon in the universe is not a gun, but a mind that can see the truth. They learned that competence is its own authority, and that some kill counts are not written in blood, but in the silent, patient language of stone and time. Her legacy was not in the victory, but in the lesson, and in the profound, enduring quiet of the now stable mountain, her presence would be felt forever.